Thank you all. Lovely. Thank you all. Welcome to the PG Psychiatry Knowledge Series organized by the Department of Psychiatry, D.Y. Patil School of Medicine. We are privileged to have Dr. Malay Dave, who will be talking to us today. And we are grateful to Dr. Joyita Devdar, who has taken time out to grace this talk as the chairperson come moderator. And we have some senior faculty members as well, Dr. Bhide being one of them. We are privileged to have many of the senior faculty, such as his good self, with us. And it definitely is very inspiring and very encouraging that probably we are doing something right. So the kind of endorsement that we get by the mere presence of such senior faculty is really great. So I welcome you all. I would just like to introduce Dr. Joyita. She is a dear friend, but today she is in official capacity. So we have to definitely go through the process of introducing her. She is an exceptional person in more ways than one. She is a very astute psychiatrist. She is a good academician. She is a very, very warm person. She is very erudite and articulate. And over and above her personal traits, I would request everybody to just mute themselves, please. Right. She is a professor in charge of psychiatry. Can you please mute yourselves, please, everybody? The meeting coordinator, please, can you do that? Right, thank you. So Dr. Joyita, as I was mentioning earlier, she is in charge of psychiatry at the Tata Memorial Hospital. She is in a unique position of being a psycho-oncologist and a palliative medicine specialist. She has trained in India and the UK. She is on the board of directors in International Psycho-Oncology Society. And she has been a part of multiple academic programs, of which I have had the privilege of being a part of as well. So I'm grateful to Joyita for having made the time today, and I will hand over the proceedings of the evenings to her. Over to you, Joyita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rashmin, for inviting me to be chairperson for this extremely important and extremely beneficial series that you have conceptualized and have been successfully running for so many years, the PG Psychiatry Knowledge Series. And so it is a pleasure to be with all of you. It is an even more pleasure to introduce dear friend, Dr. Malay Dave, who is going to be the speaker for this particular session, which is on chronobiology in psychiatry. As you would know Dr. Dave very well, he has done his post-graduation in psychiatry from Nair Hospital in 1997 and has wasted no time and gone into private practice just after he finished his post-graduation. He did his role of project coordinator in this specialized project called the Autism Dynamic Interventions, which was set in the Department of Psychiatry, Nair Hospital between 2008 to 2017. He has been president of the Bombay Psychiatric Society in 2016 to 2017. And he is also well known, apart from his talks, lectures, papers, he is well known as a quiz master, which he has done on different forums like Bombay Psychiatric Society, the Indian Psychiatric Society, Western Zonal Branch. Now he is the quiz master for the undergraduate interzonal quiz at the ANSIP since 2017 till date. And he has He is the author and co-author of many book chapters and articles, original articles. As you all know, his area of interest is neuroscience and genetics. And a lot of, most of the national psychiatrists at any level, I think, are big fans of Dr. Malay Dave. His excellence in teaching is, it's sort of famous. We all know that. And also his generosity. He's all in time and sharing articles. Anything you ask him, you have a doubt, he is the go-to person. So we started with the go-to person in Mumbai, and now he has spread his wings to the whole country, and I hear internationally. So with that, I would like to invite Dr. Malay to give his talk. Before that, may I please request everybody to keep your mics on mute. Whatever questions you have, please put on the chat box, and we will have enough time in the end to go through that. Thank you very much. Over to Dr. Malay.
Thank you, Dr. Ashmin Cholvera and the team at DY Patil for inviting me once again to give a talk on this platform. Thank you, Dr. Devdar, for the kind words. I'll be sharing my screen now. Yeah, is it visible?
Yes.
It is clearly visible? Okay. And any problems with the audio?
No.
Am I okay? So this talk will be for about 45 to 50 minutes. So please give me a reminder, maybe around 40-45 minutes, so that I could wind up the rest in time. So hi everyone, once again, and today we'll be talking about chronobiology in psychiatry. And what are we going to talk about? So I have divided the topic today into various small topics, and we'll take them up one by one. So first of all, we'll start with some basic stuff, then we'll go to some more basic stuff, then we'll go to still some more basic stuff, and then we'll talk about what things happen and how things happen. How do we try to manage the problems that arise out of this, and something more. So to start with, well, the one about the basic stuff, this is chapter 1 in the talk today. So what is chronobiology? First and foremost, let me make it very clear to you that this is not a topic. This is basically a subspecialty involving many specialties, involving psychiatry and neurosciences. So the study and some understanding of chronobiology is necessary for us, because as we all know that all psychiatric disorders have an origin and etiology in the brain, and what is happening elsewhere in the body, what is happening in the environment around, and thus affecting the body and the brain, has got an impact in the presentation of psychiatric disorders as we know them today. So this becomes important, but at the same time, let me also tell you that I am not going to talk about chronobiology in its entirety and totality, because as I said, it's a subspecialty. It's like asking somebody, like, please give a 1-hour talk on cardiology. We can just have a panoramic or a bird's eye view of the whole thing and understand some things basic without going into too much details, but at the same time touching upon points that are relevant to us in psychiatry. Another point is that if I remember and recollect the many topics, the many presentations that I've heard over so many years, there are very few takers for chronobiology. Very few lectures that have happened. Usually focuses around sleep, and that's about it. But over the last, let's say 25-30 years, the specialty has become much more inclusive of other things, other specialties, a subspecialty of core sciences, basic sciences, and research. So this is what we are in terms of chronobiology, which is the study of biologic time. And for most of us, mammals, human beings, we have a 24-hour cyclicity, that is a day. A day is basically uh, day by the clock, that is a 24-hour day, but it is also the uh, time that is taken by the earth to finish one rotation around the earth. So the body perceives it as that clock time. We know that there are geographical niches which are occupied by animals and human beings also. So there are animals who live in a geographical area that is water. There is there are some animals which live, let's say, in the deserts, various geographical areas. But also important is that organisms live and function in temporal niches, that is areas of time differences or specific time periods. Now this is more important in terms of the various uh, changing events, various fluctuations or oscillations as they are called. So there are millisecond oscillations or variation in ocular field potentials, and something like a 17-year-old cycle of emergence seen in the periodic cicada. If people are following the news recently, there is a big noise about all these cicadas which are emerging from the ground. They have been in kind of hibernation for 17 years. So these are the species which has a 17-year-old cycle in which 17 years they're under the ground. And when the time of 17 years is over, trillions of them, it's not millions, billions, but trillions of them come out to eat, mate, and die. So this is called as the brood eggs. Circadian is what we are concerned more about. Circa would mean around and die would mean day. So the time of about a day. It is not exactly a day. So these rhythms of about one day are among the most exclusively studied and the best understood biologic rhythms. Right. So this is that cicada, and looks nice, but basically, as I said, that it's not one that has come out, but it's basically a whole symphony of cicadas that are going to come up, and people are absolutely awestruck and wonderstruck about this phenomenon. And there are chefs all over the world who are looking to capture them to put it on our plates. So circadian rhythms persist even in the absence of time cues and are not only driven by the 24-hour environmental cycle. So this kind of rhythms, one of the main tuning factors is a 24-hour day, but there is also evidence of an internal biologic timing that is responsible for generating this endogenous rhythm. So there is something happening inside the body apart from this external 24 hours, which generates these rhythms. The primary circadian oscillator in all of us is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. We'll come to that in details, but as I said, this is more about the basic stuff. So we'll just look at what are the important points that we need to keep in mind before we go into more details. And the mean period generated by the human suprachiasmatic nucleus is 24.8 hours. So we are a little bit slower than the actual time of 24 hours. So our 24-hour day is slightly longer than the time the Earth takes to finish one rotation on its axis. So an individual with such a period gradually comes out of synchrony. So today, let's say I start with this, but since I am slow, and so in about 3 months, an ordinarily dialer human like us, like you, me, or anybody would be in antiphase. So after 3 months, if we allow to follow the SCN, then after 3 months, SCN would give me a signal of it being a day, whereas externally it would be a night. So this is called as antiphase. So circadian clock must be reset regularly. Otherwise, we would keep on going slow and slow and slow. So the circadian clock must be reset regularly to be effective to maintain this context of 24-hour day. What is this? It is the daily change in light levels, which is the Zeitgeber or the time clue. And we have this light receiving apparatus called as a retina. And this circadian clock that is established in the body is responsible for a whole number of things, right from behavior, core body temperature, complex social behavior like sleep, feeding, drinking, and hormonal levels. Drinking, by that I would mean water, not any other liquids. And we have melatonin, which is the main hormone which is responsible for circadian regulation. Melatonin synthesis is controlled through a multisynaptic pathway from the suprachiasmatic nucleus to the pineal gland. It's a pineal hormone. Serum levels of melatonin become elevated at night and return to baseline during the day. And this nocturnal rise in melatonin is a marker for circadian phase. So people have been very staunch about these melatonin levels, especially the night levels, and they follow it religiously. And whenever there are these changes, there are changes in the rhythm, and this is a very strong, very good marker to study circadian rhythmicity. So exposure to light, it first suppresses the elevated melatonin levels, decreasing them to baseline levels. And second, light shifts the phase of the circadian rhythm of melatonin synthesis. So this, let's say what suprachiasmatic nucleus does is allow the light to have an influence on melatonin production, secretion, and melatonin function. So any perturbation of the clock, as I mentioned, is reflected in the melatonin profile. Circadian rhythm abnormalities, we should understand, are common manifestations of nearly all psychiatric disorders. This has been a common experience. They can be predisposing factors also for mental disorders, where we have seen that many patients would have an initial sleep disturbance and then go on to develop symptoms. So they contribute to illness maintenance, even illness onset, even maintenance, and even the response to treatment, the last of which is not a very well rigorously studied area of pharmacotherapeutics. The common disrupted mechanisms thus are melatonin that we saw and its effect on the sleep pattern overall, and melatonin being a marker of the circadian rhythmicity, and the HPA axis that will come to it later on. And the most important thing is that all these systems of the working of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, melatonin, and the way it is produced, the whole melatonin cycle, HPA axis, we need to know are all genetically laid down, genetically programmed to function. So there are numerous genes involved. And when something goes wrong in any of these genes, then this could be a contributing predisposing factor to psychiatric disorders. Another longer term rhythmicity is seasonality. So we are supposed to have 4 seasons, but if we are living in a metro city like Mumbai, we do not know which season is where and when and for how long. So, but nonetheless, along with the 24-hour period for the Earth's rotation, we also have something called as the Earth revolving around the sun. So, and the Earth's axis is tilted. So what happens is that over a period of time, the day-night proportion changes within a single day. And this also requires synchronization of the physiology to the seasonal cycle to maximize survival. And there, by that, we have got 2 types of breeders, which are short day breeders and long day breeders. Actually, what it means, short day breeders, is that large mammals have long gestation periods. They conceive in the fall when the nights are long. So that is the short time, where the daytime is short. And birth occurs in the mild season of spring. So this becomes a short day breeder. We are short day breeders, long day breeders, we have no clue. Conversely, mammals with shorter gestation periods, like hamsters, conceive and give birth during spring and summer. So the birth time remains a little bit similar, but they have conceived, since being a short gestation period, they conceive more towards summer months. So the days are long. That what gives them the label of long day breeders. So like circadian rhythms, many of these are called as circannual rhythms, tend to persist in the absence of seasonal cues. So once these patterns are set, then they tend to keep on repeating yearly. Again, melatonin comes into the picture because this is one thing which guides, and we need to remember just that line from 2 slides before. Melatonin reflects the light, duration of light in the body. So whatever is happening outside in the body, it is manifest as melatonin levels, which keep on fluctuating depending on the light, that is the change in day length, and the fraction of the light, that is the duration of the day between the sunrise and sunset. So a long winter night results in an elevated melatonin profile for a long period of time naturally, and vice versa for summer nights, shorter melatonin elevation. This seasonal signal is interpreted by the reproductive axis, and there is an appropriate reproductive response. Communication of the hormonally transduced day length to the reproductive axis is likely to be mediated through melatonin receptors in the pars tubularis, and there is an unidentified factor putatively named tuberulin, which probably modulates this gene expression and prolactin release in the adenohypophysis of the pituitary, which are some of the cue for reproductory behaviors in mammals. So melatonin is important to summarize just in 2 lines for the circadian rhythms as well as circannual, that is yearly rhythms, especially reproductive rhythms in many mammals. Well, when we come to seasonality in humans, as I said, we are in Mumbai, people are elsewhere. I am not sure how people experience their seasons elsewhere in the country. And I'm not talking about metro cities elsewhere. I hope that they have got clear-cut seasons. But seasonality in humans is a point of considerable debate. A cross-cultural peak in suicide rates is observed in the summer. Why? We don't know. It is an observation across cultures. Birth rates, a small but distinguishable peak in the rate of births in spring and summer, but human beings are prolific and can have births from 1st January to 31st December, all days equally. Variable, that is seasonality is variable and is heavily influenced by cultural and geographic factors, as I said, industrialization. This decompressed bimodal structure of sleep during long nights indicates the length of the natural sleep is related to the length of the night. We will talk about the sleep a little bit later on, some things about sleep, and we'll know what is this decompression and rather the bimodal structure of sleep. And there seems to be a 2 oscillator system that could function to maintain proper sleep patterns during changing photo periods. So there should be an evening tracker and a daytime tracker. And again, melatonin, we know, is bimodal with evening and morning peaks. Okay, so now we come to basically the second part, which is talking about the masters. What were the masters running the show? Now, this basically is a graph, diagram, a kind of a date and event scale about the important research that has happened in the field of chronobiology. We are not going to go into all the years and all the things, but just to emphasize the point that right from 1920s till 2010s and beyond, we are researching and we have found a lot of things. The key things happened here, which kind of revolutionized the thinking and how we need to and what we need to understand about chronology. It happened here somewhere, and that after this we have this field of chronobiology, which is ever expanding, ever changing, and giving us more and more information. So what are we looking at? The term circadian was first used by Franz Hellberg in 1959. These are the important points in history. The oscillation process that this is changing, there is a circadian rhythmicity and this thing and that thing in around 1971. Hall, Rorschach, and Young were the first people to discover the clock gene in 1984. And this gave rise to the concept of the TTFL, that is a transnational transcriptional feedback loop model. Then after that, once you find something, then the methodology is clear, more related findings come up. So we have this additional genes and proteins which we found. And for this discovery in 1984 of the first clock gene, this team was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2017. So people took about 33 years plus to understand what it was. And after about 3 or 4 years, we are trying to understand it. So pretty advanced we are in this group today. The suprachiasmatic nucleus was defined as a cluster of different neurons in the 1880s. So this structure is known since about 120 years, 30 years. Now, discovery of its regulatory function on the circadian rhythm was discovered only 100 years later. So in 1980s, that's why I said that 1980s to 1990s was the period where very fruitful discoveries regarding chronobiology were made. So what then people found out that SCN is recognized as the coordinator of biological processes regulating numerous cellular clocks in the brain and other organisms. So as if the suprachiasmatic nucleus was not enough to be labeled as one clock, now we know that brain and other organ systems, and soon also we will know that there are so many more clocks. It's like having a mobile phone, a watch, a laptop, everything which has got a clock with you. People say that no, there are too many watches and clocks around, 3 or 4, but then the whole body seems to be teeming with clocks. So yes, a broad range of cell types in the body have and brain have biologic clocks. So the brain also doesn't have only one clock. There are multiple. Various organ systems have their own clocks and various cells have their own clocks. So clocks galore. So the relationship with the suprachiasmatic nucleus and other physiological and metabolic mechanisms are essential for physical and mental health. That is what we mentioned. People use terms in chronobiology like circadian rhythms disruption. So disruption would mean change in the phase and amplitude, misalignment, altered phase relationship, amplitude of a function, and phase. So these are technical terms. We will not go into much detail. What I have done and what I usually do in my presentations is at the bottom, there is an important reference from which these points are taken. So people are free to get hold of those references and study in more details. They would know better than me after they've read it. Well, this is what is the whole thing which I mentioned about, which got the Nobel Prize. This is from the Nobel Committee itself, and it talks about a very simple diagram. This is the cell, this is the cytoplasm nucleus, and here they've talked about two proteins, PER and TIM. So period protein and time protein, blue and orange go together, enter the cell. This is the period gene, which produces the mRNA, which produces the protein, period protein. So the period is in small letters, and the PER, the period protein, is in capital letters. So period gene produces mRNA, goes out of the cell, produces period protein, combines, joins, forms a dimer with TIM, that is time protein from another gene. They join and they regulate this. So basically, this is what? This is translation. So this gene gets translated into a protein, right? This then combines, gives a feedback. So it's a translational feedback loop, and this controls the circadian rhythmicity. This is the basis. If at a genetic level, if we remember this clearly, we'll go into some more details. This is the basis of understanding how the body follows, the body organs follow, and the body cells follow time. So a little bit in detail. So the circadian rhythm started to be more understandable with the determination of alterations in pair protein and period mRNA during levels during the day. So after melatonin levels, melatonin is a molecule, large molecule. So it's a hormone. So the assay, the analysis of the hormone is relatively easier. Now you're looking at per protein, it is a single molecule, and mRNA. So mRNA here, even the state of pair before it becomes a protein kind of. This requires sophisticated equipment and technology. So after the genes were understood, then it became easy to understand this mRNA. So levels of period mRNA peaked in the early night, several hours earlier than peak per protein abundance. So early night, high levels of period mRNA. Middle of the night, the protein itself increases, and in the day it comes down. So it kind of follows the melatonin model, the melatonin levels. So we have, as I said, the TTFL model, that is the translational transcriptional feedback loop model. So it's pretty complicated, but as I said, the dark things, the dark type gives us the most important points. So we have PER and TIM. Okay, so TIM is a product of timeless gene. The genes have got very fantastic names. Sometimes it may not make sense, but well, they've been named, and basically these names are also not names as in English dictionary, but they expand to have a different name biologically, which is very difficult to pronounce each time you want to name that gene. So we are happy with PER and TIM. So what we have to remember is per and tim, they form a heterodimer in the cytoplasm. So we saw that here. This is a dimer. Dimer means two, per and tim. Okay. And then from this, since that dimer is formed here, it allows per to enter the nucleus. Okay, that is step one. So TIM protein allows nuclear entry of per. So this heterodimer allows per to enter, because why per has to enter? Per is produced by mRNA and per has to get back so that the loop is complete. Then it becomes a feedback loop. So it has to be transcribed for R from mRNA. It has to give a feedback, and then it will give orders to the nucleus for further translation. Okay, so this is a pair, per and tim. Then we have another pair, clock and cycle. Okay, basically clock and BMAL1 in higher mammals. So this is again a couple, a dimer kind of thing, but this is inside the nucleus. Okay, so when per and tim heteromer binds to this clock and cycle proteins, this clock and cycle separates from the DNA, and because they separate from the DNA, the further translation of per genes into per protein stops. So the levels of per and tim go down. Once the levels go down, then this clock and cycle, that is clock and BMAL, it activates, goes and binds again to the DNA, and the per translation starts again. So this have to join to get into the nucleus. These are joined and control the production of per in the nucleus. So when this enter, it binds with this. So this stops the production of per. Okay. So per comes down. So this becomes less. This becomes less. So this increases translation. You have more per, and this cycle keeps on continuing. But this cannot continue round the clock 24 hours. Otherwise, we'll be like sleeping for a while, getting up, sleeping for a while, getting up. So we'll not be able to do anything except have naps continuously throughout the day. So then they found that this 24-hour period needs a delay in this period and timeless gene transcription. So they found another one, which is called as a double time gene. So it's a member of the clock genes. So what does this double time do? It reduces the stability and accumulation of per, thereby promoting a delay between per time transcription and per time nuclear function. Okay. So what does it do is that this produces this CSNK1 epsilon, and it phosphorylates per for degradation. So whatever per is produced, it degrades. It degrades. So there is a break in the whole function, and then it can start again. So this molecular mechanism occurs in the suprachiasmatic nucleus because yes, there are cells, and it happens in all cells. So there is nothing that is spared of this mechanism or machinery. So control of body temperature, sleep, wake cycle, motor activity, and neuroendocrine functions is located. This center, that is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is there in the hypothalamus. So what happens now? There are literally billions of clocks this way, because this happens in all cellular nuclei in the body, but they have to function at the same time. Otherwise, there's going to be, my kidneys will say, I refuse to function in the day, and my GI say, no, nothing doing, I'll function only in the afternoon. I mean, that cannot happen. So coordinated activity will require that this activity that is there is similar, same to same, within a certain few fluctuations in the entire body. So if this kind of a thing happens in the suprachiasmatic nucleus is in touch with every other organ system. It's a part of the hypothalamus. So then from there, through the autonomic nervous system downstream, and with all the other connections upstream, it is going to coordinate every activity, whether it is motor, behavior, endocrine, or metabolic. So the clock genes in the peripheral cells such as hepatocytes, adipocytes, epidermal, dermal cells, their own rhythmicity. Why it is necessary? Because these cells will have an optimal function, they will die, they have to reproduce, rather regenerate and become active again. So even though this mechanism is there in all the cells, suprachiasmatic nucleus, because it controls all other organ systems and also has this sets the time frames for all other activity. And this is an endogenous rhythmic activity sustained in spite of environmental cues. Means once it is set, then there will be certain variations, but it will maintain on its own. And that's why I mentioned before that this endogenous activity is a little bit slower than what the Earth does, the time that the Earth takes around its own axis for a rotation. So regardless of the presence of light, the neuronal activity in the suprachiasmatic nucleus occur at a higher frequency during the day compared to the night. So what people have found is this, that in the morning times, daytimes, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is chock-a-block with all these activities going on. The neurons of the region are excitable, and they maintain a consistent activity of sodium currents, potassium channels, chloride pumps, calcium pools. And because they're hyperactive, then they go into kind of silence at night. So that this activity that is set determines the circadian rhythmicity. So cry and purr proteins gather in the cytoplasm before translocating. So when there is this kind of a thing, daytime, all these proteins are produced, cry and purr, which we saw 2 slides back. Then they gather in the cytoplasm, and then the other type of activity happens at night, where they inhibit clock bimal activity during the night. And after that degradation of purr and cry, it manages the inhibition of clock bimal towards the morning. So again, the activity starts. So the activity starts at a cellular level. The activity is coordinated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus with that coordinates every cell and every organ system, right? And we have talked about those time-based genes which give it a break kind of thing. That is how this whole activity is coordinated. So it is something like this. This is a little bit more complex diagram. This is a diagram taken about from 5 years back. More understanding. So there are a lot of other things, but basic things remain here. Purr and cry, or that is time. Okay, but there is another one, CK epsilon delta, which has come up. And then you have BMAL1 and clock. Activity remains, overall the activity remains the same. That's why I said the most important diagram is this one. If everything else we forget, that's fine, but this is the basic working. Right? So as we understand more about this translational transcriptional feedback loop, we understand that there's a lot of complicated processes going on, and the final output is circadian output in terms of metabolism, energy, hormones, cellular homeostasis, and biological pathways. This is another more complicated. So with recent years, so the diagram that was this one is when they got the Nobel Prize in 2017, but this happened. This model was discovered in 1980s. Then after, let's say 35 years, we have this one. And then just 4 years down, 2019, we have more players and more kind of genetic activities, including epigenetic factors that have an impact on this couple and this couple, the cytoplasmic couple and the nuclear couple. Right. So that is the genetic master. That is master number one. Since this section is about masters determining how this thing works, the second master is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and roughly the system is, we have talked about it a little bit, light, retinohypophyseal tract, suprachiasmatic nucleus, pineal gland, melatonin, suprachiasmatic nucleus with downstream effects on all organ systems. That is what we talked about. So this synchronizes the endogenous rhythm to the external world through light. That is called as light entrainment. Then there is the retinohypothalamic tract. Starts from the retinal cells because retina have to pick up light. That includes the photoreceptor pigment melanopsin and terminates at the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So suprachiasmatic nucleus gathers light, receives light from the retina through this tract, and then it synchronizes the light dark cycle. So on the molecular, depending on the molecular mechanism that we talked about, and other inputs including melatonin levels, food, blood pressure, physical activity, everything. Now, since suprachiasmatic nucleus is the brain structure, it is made up of neurons, and neurons are very, very social animals. They are connected to everything of their kith and kin all across, millions and billions of neurons having trillions of connections. So each neuron on an average has got about 1,000 connections with nearby neurons. So it is dense, it's always a network. And when we talk of neural networks, we cannot but include and think about what is the role of other neurotransmitter systems, other brain areas on the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So it receives non-photic timing inputs from the raphe nucleus. Midline raphe nucleus, serotonin, that plays a substantial role in the regulation of the circadian rhythm. And this neuropeptidergic signaling maintains circadian rhythm of the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Yes. So that's another input. So one is light, one is this, and it mediates all these things which we talk about again and again. And this endogenous rhythm in response to environment inputs is now understood to have a basis in obesity, diabetes mellitus, autoimmune disorders, and mental disorders. So all these disorders will have a similar origin. This is not so different from this or this. So this is a little bit more in, let's say, chemical details, which we will not go into too much, but we now know just a little bit of a focus here. As I said, retina to suprachiasmatic nucleus is called as the entraining of light. But even the suprachiasmatic nucleus, if you look here, is composed of the shell part and the core part. These two regions also function a little bit differently, but it is not. It's going into too much detail. So, well, anybody interested, there's a reference down here, a very good reference on how the light is entrailed and how the suprachiasmatic nucleus works at a molecular level. Right. But what is important is this, and this is what I had mentioned sometime back, that when neurons work in isolation, let's say this is the action potential of this neuron, these are all in different phases and they are not uniformly synchronized. But when they are connected, then there is a stronger amplitude and more kind of coordination. So this is what happens in this molecular mechanism, the TTLF loop. This is what is happening on the cells in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, means everything is working. More important is this. This is a cell in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is the evening time. This is the daytime. And these are the various things that we now know what happened in a part of a day at a particular time in this cells. So if we look at this gray circle here, so CT0 is 00 AM. This is midday. This is back to midnight. So midday, midnight. Okay. So this will be beginning of the day. This will be afternoon. Okay, so this is 12 hours day, 12 hours this thing. I might have made some mistake, but it's a 24-hour clock. Now, if we look at this gray strip here, so that extends from hours, let's say 3 to 6. So let's say 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. to around 9 a.m. So this 6 hours, there is increase in sodium conductance. So this is where the cells start getting active when the dawn nears. Okay. Similarly, with potassium conductance, which is here, more towards the evening part. Pair expression is more here, the green, the light green one here. So as we said, this is the mRNA pair. This keeps on accumulating. So by the time we are here, we start falling asleep, right? Because the pair starts entering into the cell with the nucleus with time. Okay, this is how the whole thing is coordinated. This is the molecular cycle of the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So it collects information from about endogenous clocks through nerve projections and peripheral hormones. Yes. Its outputs target mainly the pre-autonomic neurons of the paraventricular nucleus in the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus, PV, and paraventricular nucleus is a receiver from all input from STN. So now this PVN has areas for everything: feeding, behaviors, other autonomic activities. So this then gets coordinated with time. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus is directly involved in the hypothalamic output to the preganglionic regions, parasympathetic regions of the brainstem, and sympathetic preganglionic motor neurons of the spinal cord. So this is the rhythmic control of hormone release, metabolism of all visceral structures. Increased glucose production from the liver to the sympathetic output to the liver with its projection that reach to the PVN. So this is another kind of a loop. Glucose production on the liver, because sympathetic output increase glucose production, and these projections then reach to the paraventricular nucleus. So there are loops, networks, and all coordinated by suprachiasmatic nucleus. There is increased corticosterone secretion in the adrenal or support glucose uptake in the muscle cells via sympathetic activation. So another thing is glucose utilization, stimulation of the adrenal. Okay. Internal synchronization is supplied by the adrenal glucocorticoids, pineal melatonin, adipocytes. So this is basically what happens when there are feeding behaviors, so on and so forth. So from a small group of genes that kind of have this cyclical behaviors, two cells communicating with each other in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, this input with other input and output, and we have got such far-reaching activities which are kind of, I would say kind of, because not completely, there are other factors, but these are periodic activities that we should focus on. Right. So this is an overall view of how the suprachiasmatic nucleus functions. This is here. This is an MRI plate. This is the, if you see this rectangle, this is the optic chiasma, right? This is the third ventricle, and this is where this it is. It will be here somewhere. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. So suprachiasmatic nucleus. If we see this light blue ones, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the targets of the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So it gives information there. And these pink ones are the local clocks. So suprachiasmatic is one clock. There are the other clocks. These are the cues: hormones, temperature, fasting, feeding. These are the organ systems. This is the output. And not to forget, as far as psychiatry is concerned, cognition, mood, and brain homeostasis. Everything is timely coordinated. So then we come to the one about the chemical soup, where we look at the important hormones and chemicals that that are important for us to know. So first of all, we have melatonin. Melatonin is produced from tryptophan, serotonin, and melatonin. This green one is the same cycle that happens in plants. The black one happens in animals, but this is the common part. So whether we consider ourselves as vegetarian or non-vegetarian, as plants or animals or whatever, we have this thing that happens, that's serotonin. So basically tryptophan is a precursor of melatonin. That is what we need to remember. So it is released by the pineal gland, particularly at night, is adjusted by the length of night time. So we mentioned before in one of the general points, it regulates the seasonality of energy metabolism and reproduction. It peaks a few hours before sleep or at the time of minimal vigilance propensity, and decreases as wakeful approaches. So melatonin is important for getting sleep. And there is an inverse relationship between melatonin and core body temperature. So melatonin more, core body temperature less. That's why the body temperature comes down when the sleep is at its peak. The nocturnal release of melatonin is induced by SCN input to the paraventricular. So anything hormonal, suprachiasmatic to paraventricular, and accumulates sleep both by setting this SCN. So it has got a feedback with suprachiasmatic nucleus. But it also has a quietening effect on locus ceruleus and raphe nuclei, which are important for arousal. The melatonin increases monoaminergic neural activity and contribute to or modulate regulation of dopamine and 5-HT. This is the complex thing, but what we'll have to look at is this melatonin receptors MT1 and MT2. Now, melatonin receptors, like clocks, are not localized only to the CNS, but there are of two types: MT1 type 1 receptors, which are seen in the brain, so many areas, and peripheral tissues, again, so many areas. And there is also type 2, again, which is brain and peripheral tissue. So again, melatonin receptors are found across the different types of body cells and systems. This is how it's a complicated thing, because anything that is molecular will have so many components happening. But basically, it has an effect on transcriptional regulation of clock genes. That is what is important. So melatonin signaling has an impact on suprachiasmatic nucleus. It has an effect on monoaminergic neurotransmission. It has got an effect on sleep, but it has also an effect within the nucleus on the clock genes. So again, clock genes will have an input which adds to their feedback. So we have MT1 and MT2, but what we need to do, remember, is that there are complex receptors. So they are going to be linked to G proteins and stuff, and they're going to be activating secondary and tertiary messenger systems right up to the nucleus, and that is how they work. Second group of chemicals are the glucocorticoids. So these are produced from the in the adrenal glands from cholesterol, and they have got an ultradian and circadian scale. So there is going to be a change in glucocorticoid secretion at different levels in different times of the day. and even on a daily fluctuation basis. The release peaks. So glucocorticoids release peaks typically prior to the onset of physical activity. So it is a readying hormone. So we know from the Hans-Elias general adaptation syndrome that fight or flight, what to do. So in that what to do time, glucocorticoids are released, and that activates physical activity. And it also depends on the diurnal fluctuations of corticotropic releasing hormone and ACTH. Now again, this is a hypothalamic precursor. This is a pituitary precursor. Hypothalamic precursor is going to be under the influence of suprachiasmatic nucleus to paraventricular nucleus. So when we read all these things, we have to keep repeating clock genes, suprachiasmatic nucleus, paraventricular nucleus, and so on and so forth. And then it becomes almost automatic that this is how it happens. And these levels are regulated by, see again, it has come paraventricular nucleus and suprachiasmatic nucleus. So daily variation is influenced by stressful life events. So another input apart from this diurnal variation, internally determined, is this external. So this activate the HPA axis and the autonomic nervous system. And glucocorticoid rhythm is important in regulation of other hormone systems. So there are three loops. There are three axes: the HPA axis, the hypothalamo-pituitary thyroid axis, and the HPG axis, hypothalamo-pituitary gonadal axis. So all these axes get connected at the hypothalamus and pituitary, and they have got internal kind of seesaw or stabilizing or loops, feedback loop kind of arrangements. That is where one activity of one loop has an effect on the other loop. Adrenal glucocorticoids can modulate the synchronization of the master clock to light via serotonergic projections from the Raphe nuclei. And the third important chemical here is serotonin. It releases serotonin in the presence of glucocorticoid and locomotor activity. So again, like glucocorticoids, locomotor activity start. Should I run or should I wait? That is the time when serotonergic neurons will fire. Stimulated by locomotor activity, and it provides a synchronization of the SCN, because we need to know that suprachiasmatic nucleus gets information from the median Raphe nuclei also. Brain serotonin synthesis and catabolism again have their own circadian rhythm. Cells, they function under a master, and on the sides they have their own activity too. Neuronal serotonin release in the suprachiasmatic nucleus is provided in the absence of photic stimulation. So the stimulation that happens in the night, the dark phase on the SCN, is predominantly serotonergic. And as I said, tryptophan is the mother of serotonin as well as melatonin, rather grandmother of melatonin, because melatonin is derived from serotonin. The tryptophan hydroxylase enzyme is rate limiting. Yeah, and it regulates the circadian rhythm in the Raphe nucleus. And serotonergic neurotransmission also is associated with phase shifts and changes in suprachiasmatic nuclear activity affecting the phosphorylation of clock proteins. This is where we talk about the influence regarding how this whole thing, this web of events and participants having an effect on health and disease. So this is roughly how it goes. We have talked about melatonin, we know about body temperature, we know about cortisol. This is very rough. So when this is very rough and simple. So what is simple is basically pre-2000, where diagrams were simple. But when they become complicated, this is what we know, and this is taken from an article in 2019. So as I said again and again, over the clock period of 24 hours, day and night, a lot of things happen. And not only at cellular level, not only at genetic levels. By the way, let me tell you one thing. If you have noticed that when we talk of genetic influences elsewhere, genetic disorders, we know that they have got effects over a period of time, not quick enough. But here, things seem to be happening on a daily basis. And not only daily basis, at various small time interval basis. So this should set the doubt aside that genetics can run fast if it wants to. It's not just like a slow elephantine kind of walk, but it can run faster than a hare also when it wants to. And that is what happens when this cyclicity happens at a molecular level. So we are not going to go into any of these details because, well, we need to go into a lot of things that we have no idea about in terms of metabolism and endocrines and stuff like that in details. We don't have details about that. No point in going there. But this is what happens with wake feeding, sleep fasting. Okay. So effects on sleep, influence on sleep. If it is impaired, poor sleep, depression, bipolar, Alzheimer's, that is what we know. I mean, it can be an endless list, but what is put here is definitely based on repetitive findings, research findings. Circadian dysregulation, atherosclerosis, cardiovascular risk, obesity, type 2 DM, fatty liver, lifespan age related, so faster aging, enhanced cellular proliferation up to a point, and then becomes cancer, tumorigenesis, increased body weight because of changes in the microbiota within the human organism. So human organism harbors a lot of microbiota. Again, they are cells. Again, they have their own times. So to coordinate the timing of everything inside the body is a huge task, but well maintained. This is the effect on the female reproductive system from pre-ovulation, ovulation, pregnancy, and parturition with complications. This was taken from a study which studied dysfunction associated with shift work. So a lot of things that happen, and they don't happen at random. It all starts with light entrainment, suprachiasmatic nucleus, all the molecular mechanisms, paraventricular nucleus, all the release hormones, tropic hormones, reproductive hormones, and so on and so forth. Effect of aging, what happens as we grow older, the circadian period shortens. It results in advanced phase, so we wake up early and amplitudes reduce. Because the amplitudes reduce, all these effects of jet lag and all of this time confusing things are not tolerated very well. And there is an internal desynchrony, so the tight control is lost. That result from a rotating light schedule may have dire consequences that may be exacerbated by aging. Right. At the master clock, that also is, there is a decline at a genetic level. Also, there are changes. But another thing is, recent studies have shown that stem cells and liver, that aging cells get rewired. So the aging cells also have some tricks to play. So there is a change in the transcriptional profiles. A new set of genes begin to cycle. This is an aged mice. How much it translates into human beings is still, this is just 2 years back. So aged epidermal and skeletal muscle stem cells show reprogramming of gene expression towards a stress response, inflammation, and DNA damage, with core clock genes maintaining the rhythms. So again, it is not just a decline or this.
Sorry, Malay, you have about five more minutes.
Yeah, okay, fine. So what happens is that the system not only becomes weak and a little bit efficient, but also there are changes at a genetic level, new changes which we are beginning to understand and study now. So new circadian functions, altered polyamine metabolism, modification of cytosines in DNA, right? Because when we age, the epigenetic, the information from external stressors in the form of epigenetic stimuli also get accumulated in the DNA. So there are changes. Okay, Alzheimer's disease. So with aging, Alzheimer's is one thing. So what do they experience? Increased daytime sleep and nighttime wakefulness. The season, the cycle seems to be altered, which is a common experience. There is this problem, A beta rhythms are normal when VMAL1 is deleted in the brain and retained only in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So the loop that the VMAL1 is involved in is weakened. So this activity is more. So if this is deleted experimentally, then the rhythms can come back to normal. But it's not only about sleep rhythms, it is about tau levels. Also fluctuate in the brain interstitial fluid of mice and CSF of humans. Right? So association between preclinical AD and disruption of activity rest rhythms. So preclinical myeloid plaques or higher CSF phosphorylated tau were associated with increased variability in daily behaviors, indicating fragmentation of activity rest rhythms. So this impairment, one, is associated with the change in the phosphorylated tau to A beta 4 ratios, which means that the tau is not, those proteins are not going to get cleared very easily. They are going to accumulate. We are looking into it. Coming to sleep, sleep is two things. One is the homeostat. I work hard, I need to sleep. That is the energy and the energy that needs to be assimilated back. The circadian clock, two things. And though these interacting oscillations can be dissociated by housing subjects in a timeless environment. This is a different thing. But two things for sleep. So again, it is not only circadian, but it is also homeostatic in nature. Okay. So an uninterrupted 8-hour sleep can be obtained if the sleep is initiated about 6 hours before the peak or the temperature, lowest temperature that happens around 5 to 6 here. So if the sleep, we need good 6, 7, 8 hours, then we should start sleeping by around 10 p.m. Initiating sleep between 11 and 12 affords the highest probability of getting 8 solid hours of sleep because this is the temperature. And we have mentioned before that this temperature is related to the highest levels of melatonin. That is when we are going to sleep peacefully. Okay, this is a graph for that. So we have sleep. This is the sleep time. Okay, this is the melatonin at its peak and body temperature is at its nadir. Okay, but what are the factors? Age, endogenous circadian periods. Then we have this morning people or morning larks who have got a earlier setting age-wise, and the invent of the light bulb. Now, here is what I would like to just tell you, where I mentioned in the first few slides about the bimodal nature of sleep. Actually, what happens is if it's a natural. So when we look at this here on the top, day and night, if you see the dark periods are when a person is sleeping, and if you see the white patches in between, they are when people are awake. Now, if you look, go down, 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 and if you look at modern sleep, that is after artificial light, it is all black, more black than white, hardly any white spots. It means that if we go and live in a jungle or in a cave, no lights, only natural light, no artificial light, then you will be sleeping like this. Sleep, wake, sleep, little wake, sleep. So basically, this is bimodal sleep. Good sleep, restful, rested wakefulness, and sleep again. But with light, this becomes compressed. So this is bimodal sleep, this is modern sleep. So here we are making most of what is dark. This takes away, if you add all these white things here, it will probably be this much. So our sleep is more compressed. Otherwise, we would be sleeping for longer, waking up in between, then going back to sleep again. And we have circadian sleep disorders, advanced sleep phase syndrome. The only important thing I'm going to tell you is that these are genetically coded in the coding of HPER2. So this is another variation related. It's a variant gene related to the PER family, PER2 clock gene, right? So whether it is advanced sleep phase or whether it is delayed sleep phase, these are genetically designed. And of course, on top of that, a lot of other things will come up. Now, the important thing here in this chart is only one thing. If you look at the left column, these are all the genes, not all, some of them, which are associated in the sleep cycle, in the circadian cycle, not sleep cycle, circadian cycle, clock genes. Okay, we talked of only 4 there, but there are many. If you look here on the rightmost side, these are associated disorders. Means what? Abnormalities in the clock genes are also found in patients of MDD, major depression, bipolar depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, in various combinations. Okay, so circadian rhythm disturbances are an integral part. We do not know exactly whether they'll definitely be predisposing, but whether they are actually etiological causes and whether we treatment this set. Okay, so these are integral. And then we know about a lot of things about what happens with sleep in mood disorders. In MDD, shortened REM latency, prolonged first REM, so a lot of nightmares. In bipolar disorders, in euthymia, increased REM density and proportion of REM sleep, longer sleep onset latency and sleep. In mania, shortened sleep, depression, fragmented sleep, but this fragmentation is different from here, MDD. In HPA axis findings, we have elevated baseline cortisol levels in MDD. In bipolar depression, increased cortisol and ACTH levels in manic phase. Mood disorders, melatonergic system, low nocturnal melatonin, so awakenings. In bipolar depression, high melatonin levels in the daytime. What happens, we do not know, but there is a daytime sleepiness also there in bipolar depressed patients, hypersomnolence. Similar findings in schizophrenia on sleep, HPA, melatonin. This is a summary of findings. In anxiety disorders. So these are findings which have been repeatedly proven. So it is not a complete list of findings. It probably may not reflect all the types of things, clinical phenotypes that we see in our clinical regular day-to-day practice. The one about therapies is just the last but one section, and what therapies will affect the circadian rhythmicity. One is melatonin, 3 to 10 milligrams per day can help, but then it doesn't affect the anxiety or any other psychiatric disturbance. Maybe helps in delirium. Adverse effects are rare. Common things at high doses: abdominal cramps, headache, dizziness, daytime fatigue. Ramelteon was available. I am not sure how many people use it. It's a MT1 and 2 receptor agonist. 8 milligrams at bedtime, fixed dose. Asmelteon has come, but it is MT2 more affinity than MT1. So it is slightly better. Okay, 20 milligrams at bedtime, costly. It is not available in India. Agomelatine had come, again, not used very widely because of the reason that is in the next slide, but it was both MT1 and MT2 agonism and antagonism at 5-HT2C. So it had an antidepressant effect as well as a pro-melatonergic effect. So good sleep, less of depression, especially where there is anhedonia, lack of energy, anxiety. The problem was here, raised liver transaminases in some people more than 3 times, 5 times. So it would require some monitoring. Then we have bright light therapy. When we have bright light therapy, at least 5,000 lux hours per day. This is that unit. In a lot of seasonal affective disorder, but now there are studies where it can be used for non-seasonal depression, antepartum or postpartum depression, Parkinson's, ADHD, and a lot of other things, which is studies in progress. It is not just a recommendation, study in progress. The idea is to filter out harmful ultraviolet rays because they can be potentially carcinogenic. So shortwave blue light may be used. Right. So then we have this wake therapy or sleep deprivation, total or partial. So full night sleep deprivation is the most rapid antidepressant, or it could be half night sleep deprivation, or just the last part of sleep, few hours earlier, waking up earlier, can help in depression. Okay. So this is one thing that is being studied in chronobiology, but I would, frankly, if you ask me, I would not know how to advise the patient that, because then the family members would need to be staying away. Then there is darkness therapy, dark therapy. It's acutely manic patients in dark rooms, but you can't keep somebody in a dark room. It would be quite scary, probably. The alternative is to use blue blocking sunglasses. Yeah. Then our regular medications also have got certain circadian rhythmic effects. So both ways, circadian rhythmicity can affect the metabolism of the drugs, and the drugs can affect core body temperature like antidepressants, and can bring about certain changes in stabilizing the circadian rhythms. So TCAs and SSRIs elevate nocturnal body temperature while enhancing circadian amplitude. So a person can become more active. Lithium has got GSK3 beta antagonism. So GSK3 beta normally represses the transcription of BMAL1 gene, and this derepresses, so a person can get back to that normal molecular feedback loops. Benzodiazepines also do have an effect. They are allosteric modulators of GABA A, and to have an effect on circadian rhythms, they will have to have an intact serotonergic system. Some slides back, we mentioned that an intact serotonergic system gives a non-daylight input to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Recreational drugs on the rise, they can really have a problem. One thing about recreational drugs and newer drugs are the increasing component and affinity for serotonin. That's what makes them, that is what gives the people the experience of a high hallucinogenic effect and increased activity. So MDMA is a neurotoxin and it reduces triazolam induced phase shifts. We are not talking of only sleep, but the phase shifts in the circadian rhythmicity. So even for anti-cancer drugs, there is a 2 to 10-fold change in tolerability in rodents over the day. It depends on the body's ability to absorb, distribute, metabolize, and eliminate. There are daily variations in gastric pH, gastrointestinal motility, GFR, and membrane viscosity. Timing with meals, how to give is always a challenge. Sometimes we give advice without really getting into it's kind of common sense advice, but it may not really follow what we are talking about. The last part where this is where the one where they all went spelunking. Spelunking basically is cave hunting. Now this is an expedition we just got over about last month, I think in April, end of April. For 40 days, 15 people lived in a cave, 40 meters, 100 meters under the ground. This is a French expedition. It's called an expedition because it doesn't involve any mountain climbing or any adventure except the adventure of staying in the dark. Of course, some lights were there, but they cannot come out. So there is no external light, this thing, which is going to have an effect on the suprachiasmatic nucleation. So there's no natural light in training. And this group of 15 people were not just adventurous. Okay. So this is an individual Christian Klot who leads the Human Adaptation Institute with 14 others. There's 14 days without access, constant temperature of 10 degrees Celsius with 100% humidity, 4.5 tons of equipment. And what did they study? Mechanism of adaptation, cognition, chronobiology, temporal synchronicity, genetics, sensory changes, general physiology, psychology, ethology, sociology, systems organization, ecology. They had a cognitive neuroscientist on board and an EEG technician. So the thing has just got over about a month back. So they are out on the surface. Maybe now, since a month and a half or so, they are getting acclimatized to life above the earth and getting back to normal light entrainment. But if we are able to get hold of these papers, of the series of papers that they're going to put out, we'll be all the more wiser about the effect of circadian rhythmicity on all these parameters. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. I'll stop my sharing and let's see if we can take some questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Malay, for giving this talk on such a complex topic. And obviously, you have a deep understanding of this topic, and you have conveyed that to us. And we've been learning through your presentation and through your talk. We have a few questions, so if we can get started on that. So Dr. Ashutosh wants to know if we could give, we should administer psychotropics at a particular time. Will that be a practical step?
Giving psychotropics at a particular time, I do not have that much information with me right now to give a particular time for a particular drug. That is the ideal time. I think usually we time it for as convenience regarding meal time and sleep time. But what I would suggest is that based on this basic principles of circadian rhythmicity, if you are able to give medications around that time. So if I'm giving something for sleep, I would assume that we all assume that a person is going to sleep at 11 p.m. when they might be sleeping at 3 a.m. And then they'll keep on complaining of poor sleep and we'll keep on increasing the medication. Nothing much will happen, except then they will probably get daytime sleepiness. And again, they will say that I feel sleepy, but I cannot sleep. So the idea would be if we are able to first take some time out and understand what is their, I mean, people will have different times when they eat and when they sleep. But if you are able to tailor to these two observable things, meal times and sleep time, if you are able to make certain adjustments then it would probably work, is what my educated guess is, because these things have not been worked out to the scientific, in a lot of scientific details. So yeah, difficult to actually say. But it's like this, we have got parameters which are like half-life periods. What if there's an emergency and we need to sedate? Then we don't really look at it. So it's not a very easy question, I understand, and my answer is not going to enlighten anybody more than what anybody knows at present. But yes, I think if we are able to give them or stress upon them, our patients, the importance of meal time and sleep time, maybe then when we adjust doses, it's going to be at the moment, trial and error.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There's one more question from Ashutosh regarding the sort of similar about pharmacotherapy and circadian rhythm disturbance. So he wants to know, does it merit administering melatonin to all patients, irrespective
No.
of which disorder they have?
Not at all. Because it is melatonin is if you look at scientific studies, they have not really shown benefit of melatonin in any psychiatric disorder except sleep onset. Second, circadian sleep rhythm disorders. Third, jet lag. Right. So there is no obvious clinical benefit of melatonin in any disorder. One, this is research. Second thing is, melatonin is one of the players in the whole thing. It also depends on activity levels, which are those external influencers. And we also need to know, as I mentioned, sleep. Sleep is either homeostatic as well as circadian. So if I'm going to have a cycle wherein I work till 4 a.m. and then I sleep from 4 to 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. the next day, maybe that is not my circadian rhythm. My homeostatic need for sleep is fulfilled. Now, in that, how will melatonin help? Why? Because this has been going on for years. And the question that I would probably ask myself is, do I need to change or attempt to change my rhythmicity? Because this is one area where genetics is pretty fast. So whether those kind of effects will happen fast with change effects, and if so, what will be the effect on other systems? Because chronobiology is not one system, it's an interaction of many systems. So in short, in 2 words, no, melatonin is not needed for most psychiatric disorders.
Oh, thank you. You did say that chronobiology is all systems, and to that, Dr. Nachiketa has a question that there is some conflicting results regarding blood sugar levels and exogenous melatonin, and some say it causes hyperglycemia. Others report that there's a beneficial effect on glycemia, especially in type 2 diabetes. Any explanation for that?
Regarding blood sugar levels and exogenous melatonin, I would say just try and see. Because by itself, for some individuals, maintaining a blood sugar homeostasis is a pretty difficult task, along with oral hypoglycemic agents as well as insulin. So you can give melatonin with the hope that some part of the circadian rhythmicity may happen. But if I'm giving melatonin with the hope that it is going to have a long-lasting stabilizing effect on blood sugars, then it may not work at all. In fact, if a patient has got blood sugar fluctuations and has anxiety or depression symptoms, as we see, clinically important, not the worry or anything, but clinically important to come into a category diagnosis, then an SSRI will work better. Because serotonergic modulations will have are also known to have an effect on SCN. And then SCN can have a good effect on sugar stabilization. So melatonin, we can give. But as I said, medically melatonin is doesn't seem to have so much of effects on so many disorders as we think it has. Second is another point in melatonin is that many times, or I mean, mostly all over the world, melatonin is OTC. So what kind of melatonin people are taking? What is the formulation? What is the dose? And whether the dose gives the exact melatonin concentrations, AUC, whether it is compounded with something else, all these things we need to take into account.
There's another question. This is from Dr. Bhede as to is the correlation between chronobiology and aggressive behavior, perhaps related to diurnal variation in androgen levels.
So yes, sleep deprivation can have effects on cognition and behavior, and we need to, and I think many of us have observed our patients, at least they become very irritable with sleep deprivation. Now with sleep deprivation or low sleep or diurnal variation, again, there are going to be a lot of changes in an individual, many changes which we don't know and which we can't measure. We can just hypothesize. So if we have problems in the upstream effects of SC and innervation, means basically control of dopamine, control on cognition, control on behavior. I'm talking of rough systems. I'm not talking of exact areas of the brain. Then yes, an individual could be predisposed to aggression. That is one. Hormonal levels, yes, but I am not sure. I don't think there is robust evidence that diurnal variations in androgens can cause aggression. In fact, diurnal variations with the female reproductive hormones, that is a more tighter understanding rather than androgens. So I think that would be my answer.
So the second part of Dr. Bhede's question is about, you said about sleep deprivation for MDD. And is this even when patients are already complaining of early waking?
Yeah. So sleep deprivation, from what I understand, is three types. One is total night sleep deprivation, means no sleeping at all. And there is half night. So the normal sleep is 8 hours, then 3 to 4 hours of sleep only. And if they're waking early, then cut off a couple of hours more. So partial, small partial sleep deprivation. So sleep deprivation strategies which they have are these three. And then they have to be used according to the sleeping patterns of the individual. So we have to sit with the patient and tell him, if a patient is sleeping for 5 hours instead of 8, okay, try sleeping for 4. Or the best thing would be not sleep at all and see what happens. And these three have to be used. These three have to be used something like dal, rice, and chapati in proper proportions. If one is using only one at one time, may not work. So first few days might be total, then it would be something lesser, and then see how it happens. But yes, of course, the antidepressant is needed because that is working at a different level, and that would also bolster the effect. I mean, both would work with each other.
Sure, and Dr. Bhede has wisely commented that it is not just, the effect of the light bulb arrival had its impact, and now we have the arrival of the internet and the addiction to it, especially nocturnal overuse of the web. So I guess that will have also its implications. In the interest of time, I'm going to take one more question, and that is a practical one that Dr. Ashutosh has asked, that although you have said that you don't know how to implement the wake therapy exactly, do you think you can give some practical tips as to how we could ask a patient, or what we could ask a patient to do in sleep deprivation or wake therapy? As you said about the three types.
Three types. So that is what could be done. But the thing is the monitoring bit. So if the patient is admitted under you and you are sitting in front of the patient, what is happening? It is okay. Otherwise, I think it is going to be pretty, if not difficult, impractical for that exact duration of sleep that you don't want the patient to sleep. The family members may not be able to do it. But as I said, three things are there. One is total sleep deprivation. Second one is half sleep deprivation, means half of the normal patient sleep, that many half of the duration, and just a few hours of it. So I think it would be to decide.
Yeah, I will.
And I don't think we just write it on prescription. We do not write it on prescription and say that you sleep from 12 to 4. That might not work, because if I'm going to see the patient after 15 days, then that might not be the strategy to continue. So I think if patients are, maybe residents can, in the departments can try this out and see actually what happens. Because nobody has actually worked out the guidelines for sleep deprivation as therapy. Thanks.
Your task in the IPS, everybody who's there. Right, I think we have gone to 6:30, and it was an extremely detailed presentation. Complex though it was, you did give us an insight into your learnings and learnings from you. And there are some questions which were not answered due to time, but I'm sure you can reach out to Dr. Malay and ask him and have a discussion with him. Thank you very much, Dr. Malay, again, and thank you to the audience. Over to for such interesting questions. Over to Dr. Rashmin.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joyita. And of course, thank you, Malay. As usual, you were brilliant enough to have blown the socks off everybody. And for a while, I was wondering if I still belong to psychiatry with the amount of stuff that probably was beyond me. But nonetheless, I'm amazed by how you brought it together, and you eventually circled back to the clinical implications and its clinical applications, as well as therapeutics. So it was indeed a brilliant presentation, and I'm absolutely not surprised at all, because this is exactly what we've come to expect of Malay, to be able to simplify everything, as technical and as difficult as it might seem. But he's got this knack of being able to simplify it for us as much as is possible, given the complexity of the subject at hand. But nonetheless, thank you very much, Dr. Malay, and we are really grateful to have you back, and I'm sure we'll have you back on multiple occasions in the future. You are one of my favorite speakers for this platform, as well as a very popular speaker amongst all the postgraduate students as well as the faculty now. So we thank you once again for making the time. And of course, thank you so much, Dr. Joyita. It was very kind of you to have taken time off from your schedule. You had to take half a day off at work, so it's really an imposition, but we are grateful to have you amongst us, and I'm sure you'll be back for many a program in the future as well. And no program is complete without our august audience, with stalwarts like Dr. Bide, who was a part of it, as well as some other senior faculty, and of course, all the young postgraduate students and the young consultants. It's you guys who are the driving force for this program, and we hope to be able to bring you more enlightening and delightful presentation in the future as well. And of course, last but not the least, my gratitude and thanks to Sun Pharma for its unflinching support and unconditional support. They have been with us time and again. And there is a small hiccup with the website, so I will please urge you to bear with us because of some technical issues. The website is right now offline, but the technical team assures me that in a few days it will be up and running. This program, as well as all the others, will be on the website for you to be able to access. Any which way, all of these are on the YouTube channel, so all of you can access all these lectures from the YouTube channel of PG Psych lecture series. And we hope to have you back again in the future. We have a couple of nice, exciting talks coming along in the months to come. We have Dr. Vivek Benigal next month, and we have Dr. Venkat Subramaniam in the month after that. So we promise to continue to bring you simple yet meaningful and delightful talks. And thank you once again for being with us, and have a great evening ahead. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Bye.